it's really strange how we all have a body that we don't quite understand, and it's very weird to me that you go through school and you go through a very small amount of sex education and you come out the other end and you're like, wow, my body's doing all these things and I guess that's fine. Hello, my name's Hayley Morris. I am a comedy writer, comedy actor, and now an author. And this is My Body, My Story. My experience with puberty was actually quite unhinged. I talk about it quite a lot in my book, but I hadn't started my period I think most of my friends were more developed than I was, and by 12, 13, most of them had started their period, and I looked like an 8-year-old girl. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? Why is everyone like developing? So I ended up lying about starting my period because I was like, everyone started it, I haven't, something's wrong. And so I think that was such a silly thing to do for many reasons. It was a lot of waste of pads and things like that, but also I think I never actually got to find out about how a cycle worked because I pretended I already knew. And then when I actually did start my period, I was like, can't tell anyone. Everyone thinks it's already started. But I was a very late developer, and I think that felt really intimidating, and it wasn't till I was probably 17 that I looked like a 17-year-old. I kind of had like this second puberty in my 20s. I basically never had boobs until my 20s. I was always like wishing for them, wanted them to come in, and then it was, I think maybe like my 25th year, I was suddenly like, whoa, my boobs are growing. Am I going through puberty again? But I felt, because I had acne since I was 14, so the acne was getting worse. I had really bad cystic acne all over my face. And also it's really confusing when you're at that age, because you feel like you're an adult and you feel like you should be so far past puberty and you should be maturing, and you should be not dealing with the things that feel like teenage things, which they're not. I think that is actually a bit of a myth. Everyone tells you that your acne should be gone by the time you're 18 and your body should stop developing by the time you're 18, or whatever age people say. But for me, I felt like my body changed quite a bit and my hormones changed quite a bit in my 20s, and I felt, again, really alienated. But I think that all comes down to the fact that none of us really discuss it openly, like, hey, this is happening to me and this feels weird. Does anyone else notice this? I started making videos online about taboo subjects because I feel like the way I grew up, I felt very alone, and I think there were so many things going on in my head, so many things going on with my body, and I was so ashamed of them, so scared of them. Like, I didn't understand why I was having anxiety, why I was having intrusive thoughts. I also didn't know I was having anxiety until I went to the doctors, and they were like, hey, we were having panic attacks. And I was like, well, I just felt like I was gonna die. And then also, like, just sex was really embarrassing for me. Just anything changing in my body, having boobs, even though I wanted them, felt really embarrassing for some reason. And I think all these things that happen to your body and all these feelings I had, I always assumed I was alone in them, but I don't know what it was, but one day I realized, like, that's probably not just me. And also, all these things, if we look at, are actually quite funny. Like, it is quite funny that we have these like cycles of our period that we don't understand, and we've to say that in a way that makes it not sound like I'm being like, hey, periods are funny. It's so funny that we have horrible mood swings, but it's funny that we've never understood what they are, and we all experience them, but we've all felt alone in them. And when you think of your period as a character and being like this menacing person, it does kind of make it quite funny, and it takes away from that shame and that feeling of like, oh, why is this happening to me, and just makes it like, oh, it's just this annoying person that comes to visit me once a month that wrecks my life. And like the same with my brain, I with the intrusive thoughts, with the anxiety, I was always like, why do I have this like horrible person on my shoulder that when I look in the mirror it tells me like horrible things about myself, and when I'm out and about makes me feel uncomfortable, and like everyone's staring at me. And I was like, well, it is just, again, it's just this character that isn't me, it's just someone that's like around. And so for me, I found the humour in it and thought maybe other people will. The more I talk about it and the more I do stuff online talking about that anxious brain, the less power it has. And as I've kind of gone through this journey online with making these sketches and talking about, intrusive thoughts and all of that, it's just that voice becomes so quiet where it was so loud before, and all I've done is just taken that power away from it and taken away the shame that I feel on it, and noticed that it's not just me, and it isn't just you if you have those feelings. Like, it's just such a normal thing, and it's, I don't know what causes it, but it's it doesn't need to hold that power that we give it. I think I wish people talked more about, I guess, like vaginal health or sexual health. I think we are going that way now, but again, I think there is so much shame attached to even like saying vagina or talking about the anatomy of a vagina. Like, I didn't even know that a vulva was a vulva until I was maybe 23. I just thought the whole thing was a vagina, and then there was other bits to it. But I think it's such an important thing to talk about, and I also think like female pleasure, the shame around that growing up was huge. It's so important. Like, anything sex related, I think we always felt like we were the second part of that relationship when it came to sex. Like, our pleasure came second. It wasn't important for us to finish or have that moment. And I think so many of us have quite a sour relationship with sex now, just because we kind of felt not heard. We kind of felt like it wasn't for us. There was a video I did that included a labia character, and I have always felt really self-conscious of my vulva because I didn't really know what a vulva was meant to look like. It turns out no one knew what it was meant to look like. I think growing up at school, the only time you really saw a vulva was through porn. I think you'd see like a penis or a boob everywhere, and you kind of knew what those would look like, but there was a very like hazy view around what a vulva should look like. So anyone that didn't look like someone from porn, you were like, something's wrong with me. And I think that's one thing that has opened my eyes so much, that we all felt so uncomfortable in our bodies. And I feel like there's a bit of a space in the comments now where people can laugh about it. And even like anywhere on TikTok or Instagram, I feel like people have found this voice to bring up those insecurities and laugh at them and be like, wow, there's so many of us that look at someone in a bikini that's a really small bikini and we're like, well, interesting, wouldn't fit. I don't think I've ever really understood how my body works with the cycle until I got into my sort of mid to late 20s. I think at school I was never really taught about how the cycle worked, and it wasn't until I read a book about it that I started to realise that actually the symptoms that I have aren't really what you'd expect just from PMS. So I find that before I'm due on, I do have that kind of normal mood swing, headaches, the cravings, things like that. And then as soon as I come onto my period, I feel like my symptoms are a bit different than what they maybe used to be as well. So now I actually find that my most productive week of my cycle is when I'm actually on my period, which I feel never used to happen. And then as I come out of that in what I call sort of the spring phase, is the worst week ever. It's like there's depressive episodes, I feel horrible in my body, I feel like I don't want to wear any of my clothes. If I'm wearing earrings, they have to come out. If I've got jewelry on, it has to come off. None of my clothes feel like comfortable on me, which I find very odd. Like, it just feels itchy, and I feel so silly in anything I'm wearing. It's just sort of like, I feel like I'm wearing the most bright clothes in the world and everyone's looking at me, even though I'm wearing a black t-shirt and black jeans. And then when I'm actually ovulating, so that summer period, again, it's just like my brain doesn't really want to function. I feel like my mood's really low. I feel like everything needs to be really clean, and I kind of started looking into all of these symptoms and being like, this doesn't feel very weird, like normal. It feels quite weird to me. And so, yeah, I did quite a lot of research, and I found that PMDD is, that kind of is what those symptoms fall under. I've never actually been diagnosed with PMDD, but I feel like I've tried to get diagnoses for it and have someone say to me, hey, you have PMDD, but there's just such like it's a hard process. I feel my therapist doesn't really know how to diagnose me with it. Doctors, it's such a process, and there's such like a wait list to have that sort of testing done. So I think some of the things that really made me wonder if I had PMDD was the low moods. I think regular PMS, you have the mood swings and you have those symptoms, but for me it was these very, very dark, it's like a week of time or 4 days, and that was what was really confusing to me. It's very dark, very horrible thoughts, and it's once a month. I never have felt that low. It's like there's a week, or as I said, 4 days to 7 days where I actually can't work. I feel like I can't do anything, I feel miserable and just very, very low, which I always truly thought was very, very normal. But I also think quite interesting, after my dad passed away, I noticed these symptoms like skyrocketed. And when I looked into that, that is like a very kind of common thing to happen when you go through like a loss or a big life change. Although I've never been diagnosed with PMDD, having that there as something that it could be actually made me feel so much better and has helped me to understand how my cycle works, how I can work with that cycle, and how I can like optimize it for me and not waste 4 to 7 days a month not working. I can kind of make sure that coming up to those days, I've worked overdrive to give myself those days to really sit in those moods and really be kind to myself. One thing that I would really advise is there's a book by Maisie Hill called Period Power, and she talks a lot about the cycles, and there's a lot of information in there that I think should be in schools. Like, it's such a useful read, and for me it was like a huge thing to see, to understand my own body and to understand what might be happening. But yeah, I feel like it's really strange how we all have a body that we don't quite understand, and it's very weird to me that you go through school and you go through a very small amount of sex education and you come out the other end and you're like, wow, my body's doing all these things and I guess that's fine. And then as you get, further and further along, talking to other people, researching it, you find that actually something might be imbalanced or something might not be right, but there's then not a huge amount of support there to kind of validate that, I guess, and give you help. When I'm feeling really anxious, or if I'm feeling really in my head or overwhelmed, there are a couple of things that I try to do to get me back into like the space where I feel confident and happy. And like one of the main ones, and I think it's probably one of the main causes that I get into that headspace anyway, is being inside too long. So if I start to feel really anxious, a bit overwhelmed, I try and take myself outside, even if that's going somewhere that's like quite secluded and there's not many people around so I don't feel overwhelmed. I just try and be outside and not bring headphones, not bring my phone, or have my phone, just have it away in a bag and not looking at it. I think it's like I need to take away the technology in my life, especially anything on social media, because I think you can get so wrapped up in it and so caught in a cycle that you're suddenly like, oh, what, like I don't even realize that there's things around me anymore. So for me, it's like take myself away from technology, get outside and just like breathe in actual air that's not in my flat. And also exercise. And when I say exercise, for me, when I'm anxious, that's the last thing I want to do. But if it's like yoga or something that's like slow moving, that feels really nice. I think when I'm anxious, if I go and do like a HIIT workout or a spin, I'm suddenly like, oh, my heart's racing, and although it shut my brain up for a minute, I just feel very jittery afterwards. So I think I just try and take things really slow and just create a really calm environment when I'm back from a walk, tidy up my flat, and then put on some music, and then hopefully I feel a bit more me. This is my book, Me versus Brain, An Overthinker's Guide to Life, by me. It is currently out, so you can get it. I never know how to describe it, but it's like a life story. But I talk a lot about the things that I've experienced in life, the taboos. It's there to make you laugh. So it's Me versus Brain, An Overthinker's Guide to Life. So I've basically done all the overthinking so you don't have to. And the hope, if you read this book, is that it might make you laugh, but I hope that it helps you feel seen and makes you feel less alone, and that you'll start to realise, hey, you are normal. I'm Hayley Morris. Thank you so much for watching My Body, My Story.